February 2nd, 2009, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Christine Ross is walking her dog, Ruka, in a housing development halted from construction in the West Mesa area when Ruka discovers a bone. What followed would become the center of one of the most perplexing and tragic murder cases in recent history, as this single bone led to the uncovering of a mass grave containing the skeletal remains of 11 women, most of whom were involved in sex work and struggling with addiction. For 15 years, police have searched for the killer, but have yet to name one. Meanwhile, one woman who started a list of the missing women before bodies were even found hasn't stopped her tireless pursuit of justice for the women she calls her girls. This is the haunting story of the lost girls of the West Mesa. Hey, y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Potto. Welcome to Hitch to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome. And for our friends all the way over there in Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka.
Yes. Ayubawan.
That's a good one.
Yeah, that was kind of fun.
Well, wherever you're listening, be sure to hit that subscribe button, then like, rate, and review the podcast so other people who love true crime just like you can find us.
Yep.
And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below. You can find us on Instagram at Hitched to Homicide or on X at H2H_podcast. And if you want true crime every single day of the week, please go join our closed Facebook group, The In-Laws and Outlaws. Go to Facebook and type in H2H In-Laws and Outlaws. Answer a couple questions and you're in. Go join. Lots of fun people in there.
It's the place to hang out.
It really is the place to be. We also have a Buy Me a Coffee link now if you want to send Rob some coffee. Still no Diet Mountain Dew link. Although I did find it's like grape zero something or other. You know, Mountain Dew comes out with all these wild flavors, especially during the summer.
Yeah.
Pretty good if you haven't tried one for all my Mountain Dew people out there.
I haven't tried that.
You can find the Buy Me a Coffee link in our show notes. We appreciate all your messages and emails. Thank you for being with us each and every week.
Yes.
Now, Rob, you know I don't like an unsolved case.
I know.
But I thought it was really important to talk about these women and their lives, even though spoiler alert, no one has ever been convicted of their murders.
Wow.
Yeah. Before we get started, let me thank some sources: the Albuquerque Journal, Deadline.com, A&E True Crime, KRQE, Investigation Discovery, Wikipedia, the Albuquerque Police Department, Sportskeeda, All That's Interesting, the Cold Case Project, the podcast Unresolved, and the Big Book of Serial Killers.
My favorite.
Rob's favorite.
Yes. Well, you ready?
I am.
Let's do it.
West Mesa is a high plateau on the western side of Albuquerque, right within the city limits. It stretches over a dozen miles to the northern edge of the Albuquerque metro area. West Mesa borders the Rio Grande floodplain and is part of the Colorado Plateau. It's known as the Red Rock Country.
Oh, I'm pretty sure that's the area where the Red Rocks Theater, where all the concerts
Maybe.
are done.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's very cool. I want to go there someday.
It's just a huge desert that extends into Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and into New Mexico.
Okay.
Decades ago, West Mesa was just that, a desert on the outskirts of Albuquerque. But in the 1980s, as Albuquerque began to grow, so did West Mesa. It's called urban sprawl. We have it here in our town.
Yes, we do.
The population jumped from around 40,000 people in 1980 to about 250,000 today.
Wow.
So the housing industry boomed in the 1990s and early 2000s. That is, until the recession of 2008 hit and new development came to a screeching halt.
Hold on there.
One of Albuquerque's citizens is a woman named Ida Lopez. Ida Lopez grew up in the Albuquerque region, and when she's a little girl, she was inspired by her grandfather to become a police officer. Oh. She went to college and then enrolled in the police academy, hoping to do some good in the world. And this woman truly is an angel. Just like everything else, there are good people in the world and there are bad people in the world, and then there are the exceptional. And I think it's the same with police. There are good ones, there are bad ones, and then there's the exceptional. Ida is exceptional.
Yep. Just like there are good composers and bad composers.
And there are good writers, and there are bad writers, and there are exceptional writers.
There you go.
She starts working for the Albuquerque Police Department as a uniformed officer. She moves up the ranks and becomes a detective. Ida's work often took her into an area of Albuquerque known as the War Zone. It was a high-crime area near Albuquerque's Central Avenue. It was an area known for sex trade, the drug trade, sex shops, and alcohol. Years later, for public relations reasons, they're going to rebrand this area and call it the International District. But Detective Lopez was raised Catholic, and this wasn't her scene at all. The drugs, the sex trade, all the dirty dealings, but it really revealed to her the dangers that some women faced, primarily sex workers who were caught in this horrible, vicious cycle of drug and alcohol dependency and addiction.
Sure.
And who, more often than not, these women and girls were looking for a way out. Now, Detective Lopez didn't judge these women, but she started calling them, quote, her girls, end quote. And she was very protective over them. She would go into this war zone and check on them. These girls just would turn up missing, and no one seemed to care. Their families would report them to authorities, but if they were over 18, it wasn't a crime not to be found.
Right.
And we always talk about how predators are after the weak impala of the herd, right?
Sure.
Easy prey.
Yep.
And these women were easy prey. In the mid-2000s, and following a medical leave of absence, Detective Lopez came back to the Albuquerque Police Department and was assigned a part-time job focusing on the area's missing people, the missing girls. And there were a lot of them, like Victoria Chavez. Victoria was a 26-year-old mother of two who had tragically fallen into a life of sex work and drug use. By the time she disappeared in 2004, she had been in and out of jail and prison multiple times for prostitution and was well known to the police as a drug user. She had frequent run-ins with the law and struggled to stay out of trouble despite the efforts of her probation officer. Victoria's mother officially reported her missing in March of 2005, but by then, no one in her family had seen her for over a year. She was the perfect victim for a killer. She was battling personal demons, and the fact that her disappearance went unnoticed for a very long time just made her prime for the picking.
Wow.
Gina Michelle Valdez, mostly known by her middle name Michelle, was born on August 1st, 1982. She was the oldest of three sisters and grew up in a loving family. However, as Michelle entered her teenage years, she made some bad decisions, and she was a handful for her parents to keep up with.
Okay.
And we know that teenagers can be a handful.
Oh, yeah.
We've had a couple of handfuls of teenagers around here. Yep. But Michelle became a mother at a very young age, giving birth to a daughter she adored. A few years later, she had a son and did her best to be a good mom to both, even as her life began to spiral out of control. But Michelle fell in with the wrong crowd where sex work and drugs were common. And despite this, her family insists it didn't define who she was. She was a great big sister who always looked out for her siblings, and she was a mom who cared about her kids. According to Michelle's mother, Michelle didn't want to be in this cycle of drugs she was in. She wanted help, but she didn't have the money or the insurance to get that help. Drugs took over Michelle's life, and she would be gone for long periods of time, and then she would come back asking for money or help. But then Michelle stopped coming back to see her family altogether, and weeks went by without any contact.
Wow.
In February 2005, about a month before Victoria Chavez is reported missing, Michelle's father reported her missing. He told the police about her involvement in sex work and drug use, which were already known to the law enforcement officers because she had prior convictions for prostitution. Michelle remained missing for years, with her family constantly looking for her and worrying about her.
Wow, that's got to be just
tough,
tragic and scary.
Yeah. You have no idea where they are or if they're okay.
Yeah.
But as Detective Lopez looked deeper into Michelle Valdez's disappearance, she noticed a disturbing pattern. Many young Latina women with a history of drug use and sex work had gone missing from this place they called the war zone. And as she dug deeper, the disappearances started around 2001 and continued through 2006, right as Detective Lopez started investigating the cases that had been largely ignored by everybody else. Ida Lopez began compiling a list of these missing women. It was between 16 and 24 names, depending on the information she found.
Wow.
And these women had prostitution convictions or were suspected sex workers who had disappeared between the years of 2001 and 2005, and every single one of them was last seen in the war zone. Now, out of the 24 women on her list, only 17 had available dental records, which Ida had to request from their families. And that's a hard task. I mean, that's really hard.
Yeah.
Because at that point, it's to identify their dead loved one.
Right.
But despite all of Ida's efforts, her list of missing women was always overshadowed by Albuquerque's cold case unit's more high-profile cases. So because they were sex workers and drug addicts, they kind of got pushed to the back burner.
Sure.
Another woman on Detective Lopez's list is Cinnamon Elks. Cinnamon's mother, Diana, would later say that Cinnamon was the perfect child any parent could hope for. She was the best kid anybody could hope for. But things took a turn during her teenage years when she started experimenting with drugs, and it only got worse from there. Cinnamon had 2 children whom she loved dearly, but she struggled to care for them. Her drug use quickly escalated to abuse, and she racked up quite a criminal record, 19 arrests for prostitution and solicitation with 14 convictions, 12 arrests for drug possession with 5 more convictions. Her last arrest was in July of 2004, and after that, she disappeared.
Wow.
Cinnamon often went to her family for money, but eventually she stopped coming around. When her family didn't see her for a while, they feared the worst. In August of 2004, just a month after her last arrest, Cinnamon's mother, Diana Wilhelm, reported her missing. Cinnamon always called her mom on her birthday, and when that day came and went without a phone call, her family knew that something was wrong.
Sure.
When Diana went to the police, she was told that adults had the right to cut off contact with anyone, even their parents, and she couldn't prove that Cinnamon was missing. So you can kind of see why the police would be like, we've got other pressing cold cases.
Right.
Finally, in December of 2004, police filed an official missing persons report. Cinnamon's family submitted her dental records to the police, fearing that they might eventually be used to identify her body. So, officially reported missing in December of 2004, but her family had unsuccessfully attempted to report her missing as far back as August of 2004. So, 5 months pass.
Why was it unsuccessful?
Because when they went in, they were like, she's an adult. She doesn't have to tell you where she is.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
Plus, she's had she's got an arrest record.
Right.
And so police are like, who knows? She may have moved on. She doesn't have to be in contact with you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Another one of Detective Lopez's girls is Julian Cindy Naito. She goes by Julie. Julie was born in Albuquerque to a single mom named Eleanor. She had one sister, Valerie, with whom she was incredibly close. Julie was tiny. She was very petite. And even as she got older, she was still so little that her mom had to alter her clothes to fit her.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
She's just little.
Wow.
In her teenage years, Julie gave birth to a son whom she adored. She didn't touch drugs until she was 19, but using turned into dependency fast when she started trying drugs. And just like the others, Julie Naito was last seen by her family in August of 2004 and was reported missing shortly after. and due to her issues with drugs and prostitution, which resulted in 4 convictions. Not much effort was made to find her at the time. Julie's disappearance left a huge void in her family's lives. Roughly 2 years after she goes missing, her sister Valerie died of a drug overdose in an Albuquerque motel, a death that family members believed was directly tied to Julie's disappearance.
Wow.
Her mother became the guardian for her son. She also became the guardian for her sister's son. She believed Julie's disappearance led directly to Valerie's overdose. Julie Naito was reported missing in August of 2004. Now, these victims were all between the ages of 22 and 32 at the time of their disappearance, and all went missing sometime between 2004 and 2005. And due to their lifestyle, nobody's looking for them because they're adults, not a crime to disappear.
Yeah.
But Detective Lopez is looking for them. She's driving out to the streets in this war zone and asking around about her girls. When was the last time you saw her? Who have you seen her hanging out with?
You know, it's pretty amazing that someone like that would take that much interest in the forgotten society.
Yeah. She's going into this hellhole all the time looking for these girls.
Truly an angel.
Another one of Detective Lopez's girls is Veronica Romero. Veronica was born on June 19th, 1976. She's an only child but has a large extended family, as well as a close-knit group of friends who called themselves her soul brothers and sisters. Veronica would eventually have 5 children of her own, but she left them to be raised by others. Veronica had a history of drug use and sex work. She was last seen in February of 2004 near the street corners of Wyoming Boulevard and Central Avenue, right in the middle of the war zone. Witnesses saw Veronica get into a white pickup truck. She was never seen again. Family members would report Veronica missing around Valentine's Day, just a couple weeks later in 2004. And after filing the report, Veronica's friends and family would go into the war zone themselves, just like Detective Lopez is doing, to look for her. Wow. And they even distributed missing persons flyers all throughout that area, just in the hope that somebody somewhere might have seen her.
Somebody might know something.
Anything.
Yeah.
Now, a girl not on Detective Lopez's list is Monica Candelaria. Monica was born on June 20th, 1981 in Albuquerque to parents Gabriel and Isabel. She has one sibling, a brother, but had a large extended family that provided her with lots of love through her roughly 21 years. When Monica is really young, she had a baby boy she named Michael. She adored this child. But Monica was pulled into the world of gangs, and it was believed that she had ties to local gangs in the war zone area.
Gotcha.
She had one conviction for prostitution and was known by the police for living a, quote, high-risk lifestyle, end quote, which likely was sex work and possibly drug use.
Right.
Monica was last seen on May 11th, 2003 in the South Valley of Albuquerque near Atrisco Drive and Central Avenue, which is still in the war zone. She's reported missing 2 weeks later.
Okay.
And her case was actually handled by investigators from the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department.
All right.
They were active on her case for about 6 months. They gathered all this information from rumors from Monica's loved ones. One notable rumor came from Monica's mother, Isabel, who told police that a man named Isaac in her neighborhood was spreading stories about Monica being killed and buried in West Mesa.
Really?
That's called foreshadowing.
Uh-oh.
And yep, I'm still going to do foreshadowing. Another on Ida Lopez's list, Doreen Marquez was born on August 31st, 1976, to her parents David and Dorothy. She was one of 5 children. She grew up in Albuquerque with 3 sisters and a brother. Doreen attended West Mesa High School. Doreen had 2 daughters at a young age, Destiny and Mercedes. Unlike the other girls on Ida Lopez's list, Doreen didn't have any significant issues growing up. Throughout her teenage years, she was a stable kid, she was a responsible kid, and she became a responsible parent for her own children. She lived in a nice home in an affluent area. She drove a nice car. She provided a great life for her daughters. Doreen was bubbly. She liked to dress well. She liked to have nice clothes. She liked to get her hair and her nails done. But it wasn't until Doreen was well into adulthood that she started experiencing problems. And this happens when her boyfriend was sent to jail. They broke up, and Doreen struggled with being a broken-hearted single parent, and she turned to drugs, specifically heroin, to cope.
Man.
That's like going from the frying pan into the fire.
Yeah, gee whiz.
According to her friends, it was only in the last year of Doreen's life that she was doing drugs. Doreen was never charged or was convicted of prostitution. She was jailed for drug possession, and police suspected she had some involvement in the sex trade. But while she's in jail for the drug charge, Doreen had some dental work done. It's unclear exactly when Doreen went missing. Some believe she disappeared in October of 2003 after dropping off one of her daughters at a school near Albuquerque's University Heights. But a friend recalled seeing her months later in 2004. By then, Doreen was deep into addiction and often disappeared for months at a time, only to reappear unexpectedly.
It's sad.
She frequently left her daughters with her father or other loved ones. Doreen was not reported missing until December of 2004. She was 28 years old. Then on February 2nd, 2009, a woman walking her dog would change everything about Detective Lopez's search for her girls. Christine Ross loved taking walks with her husband and their dog, Ruka, in the West Mesa area.
Okay.
We do this every day with Scotty, and yesterday he found a bologna and cheese sandwich when he and I were out on a walk.
Yeah.
And we had to go back and double check to see if the bologna and cheese sandwich was there over and over again.
Oh, yeah, they remember. It's funny, Scotty, I'll be down here in the studio, and every afternoon at 3 p.m., like clockwork, here he comes.
Ready to take his walk.
Got to do her walk.
Got to do the walk, yeah. The Rosses moved to West Mesa near 118th Street, southwest of Albuquerque, in the fall of 2008. And every night they would take their dog for a walk in this neighborhood that had started construction, but then stopped because of the burst of the housing bubble.
Okay.
Their usual route took them through an area that was supposed to become a brand new neighborhood, but at the time it was just flattened earth and cement blocks. But the flattened soil made by the builders laying foundations actually made a flat path to walk on.
Okay.
Christine, her husband, and their 3-year-old Shar-Pei lab mix. I've got a picture of Ruka. I will post it in the In-Laws and Outlaws.
Okay.
They went for a walk. Ruka starts sniffing around. Something was sticking out of the ground. Christine and her husband didn't think much of it at first because Ruka sniffs at everything.
Sure.
Scotty sniffs every single blade of grass as we go on our walks.
That's why it takes 2 weeks to do one walk.
And he has short legs.
Yeah.
But as they look closer, they realized it looked like a human bone.
Oh.
So Christine snaps a photo of the bone with her phone. She sends it to her sister, who's actually a nurse. And not long after, her sister calls her and says, that probably is a real human bone. She thought it looked like a femur.
Wow.
So they call the police, who arrive soon after, to check it all out.
Okay.
The police confirmed that the bone was indeed human. Some reports said it was a femur, while others thought it was a rib bone. I've also read it was a right collarbone, the clavicle. Either way, it was definitely real, and police started searching for the rest of the body, hoping to identify the person and decide if an investigation was needed.
Sure.
And it was.
Yeah, I would think so.
Now, this is an area, West Mesa, that's been excavated for fossils in the past. So at first, police don't really know what they have. It could be an ancient burial. So a couple dozen detectives teamed up with anthropologists, medical investigators, and volunteers to search the area rock by rock. And because the land was already prepped for homes, the dirt had been graded and leveled, making it a bit challenging. It was really packed down.
Sure.
But within weeks, they managed to sift through many feet of soil looking for any signs of bones or bone fragments.
Okay.
And boy, did they find them.
Really?
Some buried as deep as 15 feet.
Wow.
But the sheer number of bones they uncovered was what was truly shocking.
Wow.
Some of the bones were still partially intact, but others had been scattered by the construction work for the failed housing developments. So heavy equipment that was used to dig and level the dirt had moved some of the bones around. And scavenging animals likely contributed to this big mess.
Sure.
The result was this huge maze of bones that would take medical experts months to piece together, trying to find any complete skeletons.
I'm sure.
Yeah, and the homicide detectives are looking at all these bones, and they're thinking this seems to be the work of a single killer who had used this isolated area as a dumping ground for his victims.
Right.
However, the public won't know this yet. In fact, it would be more than a week before the police officially announced that there were human remains that they found buried in this area.
Why'd they wait so long?
I don't know. I do not know. Maybe they just didn't want to cause mass hysteria.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
But they do, when they do finally talk to the public, they tell them that the human remains had been buried relatively recently.
Okay.
The first body they find on February 2nd, 2009, is Victoria Ann Chavez. She's buried just 18 inches below the surface without any clothing or personal items. Her remains were identified only because her family had provided dental records to the police when they reported her missing in 2005.
Okay.
It's believed that Victoria was killed and buried sometime in 2004, but the exact timing is impossible to determine due to the decomposition of her remains.
Right.
The cause of her death also remains a mystery for the same reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Officials could only estimate that she was killed between 2004 and 2005, and based on the timeline, that was only provided by her loved ones. I mean, they're the ones who said this is when she went missing.
Right.
And the bones that they have no appearance of trauma. So there's no gunshot wound. There's no blunt force trauma to the head.
Yeah.
But as they're digging and finding bones, again, they're giving them to a local medical examiner.
Right.
So this takes months because they're painstakingly sifting through the entire area, and they're finding the remains of many different women. They just don't know who they are.
Right.
On Saturday, February 21st, 2009, police discover the bodies of 2 more women. These are sent to the medical examiner for identification. Then just 2 days later, on February 23rd, they found another body, a young woman who was pregnant when she died. Inside her remains, they find a decomposed fetus.
Oh,
Tests
sad.
later confirmed that the child had been conceived about 4 months before she was murdered, and they don't even know if she knew if she was pregnant or not.
Wow.
But police are hoping that the fact she's pregnant might be a potential clue in identifying her. And within days, that hope turned into reality when police confirmed her identity, revealing she was another missing person on Detective Lopez's list of girls.
Okay.
It's Michelle Valdez.
Wow.
Michelle is the 8th body found in West Mesa, discovered with the remains of her unborn child. And Detective Ida Lopez knows the issues that were troubling Michelle's life because she knew her. She was one of her girls. Mm-hmm. She had relationship problems, legal problems, which involved prison stints for both sex work and drug possession. And Detective Lopez knows that Michelle was not a bad person. She had just fallen on hard times and deserved a second chance.
Right.
But it's a second chance she's never going to get. It's unclear exactly when Michelle went missing, but she was believed to have died around the same time as Victoria Chavez between 2004 and 2005. She, too, was identified by her dental records.
Okay.
Now, as they continue to excavate and sift, they're now able to identify 11 different bodies, 12 if you count the unborn child.
Right.
But police aren't saying out loud that they have a serial killer on their hands who'd murdered these women and dumped them all in the same 10 by 30 yard piece of earth.
Wait, let me understand this. We have 11 bodies, 12 with a fetus, all in the same spot, and we don't think we have a serial killer?
Yeah, and they can tell by the decomposition that they've been buried there within 2 years of each other.
I thought that was the very definition of
a serial killer.
Okay, whatever.
What police do know is that both Victoria and Michelle were both Latina women in their mid-20s with similar backgrounds of sex work and drug abuse. It's known that these 2 women actually knew each other, but we don't know how well. They're both ID'd by their dental records, and police didn't think they'd be as lucky with some of the other bodies because one had 0 history of dental work and another didn't even have a skull.
Oh, wow.
On February 25th, 2009, Albuquerque Police Chief Ray Schulz holds a press conference to update the public, saying it was, quote, one of the largest crime scenes in Albuquerque history, end quote. Later, he's going to correct himself and say, yes, this is the largest crime scene ever in Albuquerque. He's also going to tell the public that there's no need to worry about a serial killer because the remains aren't fresh.
What?
So if it was a serial killer, he was killing and dumping there long ago. I don't know how comforting that is.
Yeah.
Maybe he just stopped because of the construction.
Right.
Because of Michelle and Victoria being on Detective Lopez's list, police are thinking, we have all these missing women. 2 of them are in this gravesite, so maybe others that are missing and on this list are also in the gravesite.
Right.
But they go back as far as 1980 to look at reports of missing women. But their belief is because of all the hard work that Ida Lopez did looking for her girls, they might be able to narrow down their search and at least start with those women.
Okay.
And they quickly ID'd Cinnamon Elks.
Oh, wow.
She is the 11th body in what they're now calling the pit. So we have the war zone and we have the pit.
Jeez.
She's identified as the oldest victim, 32 years old, when she disappeared. They were able to ID Cinnamon by the dental records given to the police when she went missing in 2004. And at the time of her identification, Cinnamon's mother, Diana Wilhelm, told police that her daughter was familiar and possibly friends with the first 2 girls who were identified, Victoria Chavez and Michelle Valdez. However, this was somewhat overshadowed by the news of another identified victim connected to their social circle, Julie Naito. So less than 2 years after burying Julie's sister Valerie, her family now learns that Julie is one of the bodies they found in the pit.
Oh, my God.
Investigators believed that the 7 other unidentified women found in the pit shared similar traits. All young women, mostly Latina heritage, involved in sex work and drug use, and they were all from the war zone, which, like I said, the authorities are now starting to call, after they found all these bodies, now they start to call it the International District instead of the war zone. That's bad for business.
Jeez.
Detectives started combing through old missing person cases from the past decade, and they looked to Ida Lopez's list, which confirmed Ida's hunch that someone was targeting these women, murdering them, burying the victims in the West Mesa, because 4 of the identified women were already on her list. Now, throughout March, the families and loved ones of missing women started talking to the press. And for many, it was the first time they had a platform to talk about their loved ones who'd been ignored by the media and the police for years.
Right.
Now they finally had a chance to share the stories of these women with a national audience that seemed to care. But the problem was the media seemed to want to focus more on the downfall of these women than their death and burial or their life. The story for the journalists was how these women ended up in their situations, how the city and officials had ignored families' outcries. And none of that was really making it into the newspapers, how great these people once were.
Right.
It's just more about, well, they were addicted to drugs and they were in the sex trade.
Right.
Investigators start chasing leads in the hopes of identifying some of the women through dental records and DNA testing. This painstaking process went on through March of 2009, the second month of the investigation. It wasn't until April that more victims were publicly identified, starting with 2 at the beginning of the month. One was Veronica Romero. Veronica's family was worried when the news broke of the girls in the pit in West Mesa. They hoped it wasn't her, but they thought knowing the truth would finally bring them closure and ensure that Veronica was no longer suffering. And they learned that Veronica was in the pit. Veronica Romero was the 7th victim found in West Mesa and the 5th to be publicly identified. Like the other women, her body had been buried for too long for the medical examiner or the forensic investigators to learn much about her death. However, they hoped her story could provide some crucial evidence. Maybe the date would become relevant later, or the details of the white pickup truck that picked her up that was seen that night could help.
Sure.
Veronica's identification was announced to the world on April 2nd, 2009, exactly 2 months after the first body was found. But on that same day, police also announced they had identified yet another victim, whose story dated back nearly a year before the others, Monica Candelaria. Remember, she's the one whose case was handled by the sheriff's department and not the Albuquerque police and Detective Lopez.
Right.
Now, the rumors about Monica being buried in the West Mesa, remember? The guy named Isaac said this?
Mm-hmm.
And it got back to her mom, and that had been circulating as far back as 2003, about 6 years before the bodies of Monica and the other women are found in the West Mesa.
Wow.
Now, at the time, it seemed the Bernalillo County Sheriff's officials couldn't confirm or deny the rumors, and it's still unclear if this Isaac was for real or was just talking nonsense that turned out to be true.
Right.
Later, it was reported that Monica's loved ones had started searching the area near where her body would eventually be found, all on their own.
Jeez.
Can you believe that?
Amazing.
Along with the police, they scoped out the region near the 118th Street, and they discovered a human jawbone.
Oh.
When they're looking for her, for Monica, they find a jawbone. Unfortunately, it didn't belong to Monica. And this led to a very brief digging attempt that failed to uncover Monica's remains or those of the other missing women.
Okay.
So the county sheriff did do some digging in the area, but they didn't find anything right by this jawbone.
Okay.
And whose was it? I mean...
It's not like you find a jawbone lying around every day.
Yeah.
It's got to be somebody.
Yeah, but they seem to be like, okay, well, we couldn't find a body. That's the end of that.
But didn't the jawbone have teeth?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's crazy to me that they went out there on their own based on this guy, Isaac, saying she was buried in the West Mesa.
Right.
So they're out there looking around and they find a jawbone and they're like, it's a jawbone. Well, it's not hers. We're going to dig a little bit.
Yeah. Move along.
Move on. Nothing to see here.
Yeah.
Investigators from the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department continued to follow up on leads until October of 2003, and after that, they handed it over to the cold case unit, where it sat for years. Monica Candelaria remained a missing person until February 2009. Hers was the third body found in West Mesa, and she was the sixth victim to be identified nearly 2 months later.
Okay.
Now, like the other victims, Monica's cause of death was impossible to determine, but police were hopeful that the information gathered during her initial investigation might be useful in catching the killer. But nearly 6 years had gone by since Monica went missing, and her disappearance predated the other victims by almost an entire year.
Wow.
So far, she was the only victim to have gone missing in 2003, while the others went missing in 2004 or 2005.
Okay.
So was she the very first victim?
Yeah.
Seems like she was.
Yep.
And from the beginning, Isaac is saying she was buried in the West Mesa.
Now, did they investigate this Isaac guy?
I don't know if they knew who Isaac was.
Gotcha.
Yeah. They did go check on leads. You know, they looked through stuff, but then they were like, this is a cold case. Put it up on the shelf.
Just the fact that he knew where she was buried. I mean,
the fact that he said that and they actually went out looking for her there. Yeah. But police are trying to figure out the identities of the 5 women who were still nameless. They believe that they would all be on Detective Lopez's list, and when the 7th victim is identified, they were absolutely correct. Doreen Marquez. When Doreen is in jail for drugs, she has some dental work done, remember?
Right.
And it's those records that allow the police to identify her body.
Wow.
Police continued to excavate the pit where the bodies were found for 2.5 months, trying to find each and every bone they could. But by April, officials said they had 90% of the bones that could be found, so they started tilling the soil, hoping to recover fragments that were moved around because of the construction or because of the animals.
Right.
So if you think about it, if you've ever watched a neighborhood go up, oh my gosh, they're moving so much earth around.
Oh, yeah.
And that's exactly what they've done here.
Yeah.
On April 24th, 2009, police released a photo to the media of a fake fingernail that they had discovered, hoping that someone might recognize the acrylic design. And the next day, April 25th, 2009, the police ended their excavation, and the same day, the case was featured on America's Most Wanted.
Really?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Almost all the women buried in the pit were on Ida's list, With two exceptions, there were two victims who were younger than the others and really didn't fit the killer's typical profile.
Okay.
The rest fit the profile perfectly because they're a sex worker. They're young. They'd gone missing 5 years before, and there'd been almost no effort to even find them.
Right.
So by the end of April and the start of May 2009, they had all these bodies, but police still had not referred to this crime as the work of a serial killer.
Deny.
And remember, the police had even asked the victims' friends and families not to voice their opinions to the press on what they thought happened because it could derail their investigation. But the press was still running with the sex work and the drugs.
Right.
By now, there's a reward of $50,000 that's going to double to $100,000.
Wow.
And the FBI is now working on the investigation and supervising as the case moves forward. A team of about 40 officers conducted interviews, like over 200 interviews.
Wow.
Months went by without any updates to the public. Authorities did get thousands of tips, but most of them were from convicted felons who wanted a deal. Yeah.
Yep. Get some cash and a deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They served over a dozen warrants on persons of interest in the summer of 2009, but they still were in the dark on not only who had murdered the women, but how someone had murdered the women.
Really?
Because there's no gunshot wounds. Again, we said this, no blunt force trauma, They just have these remains. And they still have victims who are unidentified, like a young African-American girl who was the owner of the fingernail. She also had broken her nose at some point in her life and had at some point a deep cut on one of her legs. It was even possible that she had been stabbed at one point, but it wasn't a fatal wound and it wasn't related to her murder. Not until November of 2009 did they discover that her name was Selania Edwards. Selania Edwards was born on November 26, 1987, in Harris County, Texas. She never knew her father and was separated from her mother at the age of 5 after her mom was incarcerated.
Oh, my gosh.
So Selania and her 7 brothers and sisters went into foster care where they were split up.
Wow.
Unlike the other victims, Selania was African American and didn't live in Albuquerque or New Mexico, but in a foster home in Lawton, Oklahoma, 500 miles east of where her body is found in August of 2003.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Selania had run away from her foster home and was reported missing shortly thereafter. She's only 15 years old at the time and was listed as a, quote, endangered runaway, end quote, out of Oklahoma State. For the next 6 years, no one knew where she was, with the exception of someone saying they saw her staying at a motel known for sex workers in Aurora, Colorado.
Okay.
So police think Selania got involved in sex work and might have even been traveling along Interstate 40 as a, quote, circuit girl, end quote, which is a term that police use to describe these women who travel for sex work. She might have even been traveling in a group with 3 other women named Lucretia, Ty, and Diamond. Okay. And she likely had gone by 2 separate aliases herself during her travels, Chocolate and Mimi. But that's about all they know about Selania, because she hadn't been on anyone's radar prior to her identification, and police had no idea that she was even in New Mexico, and she didn't fit the killer's profile with being younger than the other women, and she's a different racial group. She's Black, and the other girls are Latina or white.
Sure.
And she wasn't known to have any ties to the other victims, all of whom had worked in the war zone and had some kind of loose connection or familiarity with each other.
Right.
So she was not on Detective Ida Lopez's list, and it wasn't until a sketch was made of her skeletal reconstruction that a possible connection was made. Police then requested dental records from Oklahoma State, which confirmed her identity days later.
Okay.
Selania Edwards was the 8th known victim of the killer. Next is Virginia Cloven. Virginia was born on August 7th, 1981, and grew up in Las Chaves, a small town on the outskirts of Albuquerque. She lived with her family in a small trailer and was known for her unique and fiery personality. Mm-hmm. But Virginia's life wasn't all that pleasant. In high school, one of her brothers was shot and killed. Wow. Just days after that tragedy, Virginia ran away from home, followed by her other brother. So maybe her home life wasn't that great.
Right.
Virginia moved in with her boyfriend in Albuquerque, but tragedy struck again when he was hit by a car and became comatose.
Gee whiz.
At 17 years old, Virginia was broke, homeless, and on the streets of Albuquerque in the war zone. Her life began to spiral as she fell into sex work and drug addiction. Years went by with only sporadic phone calls from Virginia, who had been in and out of jail on various charges. In June of 2004, Virginia contacted her parents. She was excited about a new boyfriend who had just been released from prison. She told them they planned to get married. And this is the last time Virginia's family will ever hear from her. Virginia was reported missing in October of 2004, 4 months after her last contact with her family. She remained missing until the fall of 2009 when her parents received the devastating call that she was one of the victims in the West Mesa.
Can't imagine.
Number 10 is Evelyn Salazar. Evelyn is born in November of 1978 and was the mother of 2 daughters, Mariah and Angel. She loved to cook. She loved the outdoors. She was a loving mother. Unfortunately, she also had a history of sex work and drug use. Unlike the other victims, Evelyn wasn't alone when she disappeared. In March of 2004, 25-year-old Evelyn left a family gathering with her 15-year-old cousin, Jamie Barilla. They were headed to a park near San Mateo and Gibson Boulevards near the Albuquerque International Airport on the edge of the war zone.
Okay.
Neither of them ever returned home. She is identified using DNA evidence through the University of North Texas. And as you might imagine, number 11 is Jamie Barilla, the 15-year-old girl, her cousin.
Yep.
Jamie is born in September of 1988 and spent her entire life in Albuquerque. She was not involved in her cousin Evelyn Salazar's activities. No drugs, no sex work. She's just a regular teenager who was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, right.
Her family doesn't believe she disappeared willingly because, and this is really telling, she left all of her personal items behind and even her curling iron was on at home.
Wow.
So the cousins were expected back within an hour, but were never seen again. Their family reported them missing on April 3rd, 2004, and Evelyn was added to Detective Ida Lopez's list of missing women in 2004. When the news broke in February of 2009 that 11 women's bodies and 1 fetus had been found in West Mesa, Evelyn and Jamie's families spoke to local news outlets, hoping that they were not among the victims. Evelyn was identified in November of 2009, the same time as Virginia Cloven, and Jamie was identified in January of 2010.
Wow.
Jamie Barilla was the youngest victim. She's identified through extensive DNA testing. It took months to complete it. It took nearly a year from the discovery of the first bone in February of 2009 to the identification of the last body, which was Jamie, in January of 2010.
Yeah.
So now they know the victims' names. But who was their killer? Authorities put together a timeline that showed from May 11th, 2003, when Monica Candelaria is last seen, to March of 2005, when Michelle Valdez is reported missing. So 2003 to 2005. The killer primarily targets Latina sex workers with a history of drug use, but there were also white and black victims, most of whom were known as sex workers in the war zone, with the exception of the 15-year-old Jamie. And the killer seemed to like them younger. His victims were all super young, between the ages of 15 and 32, but there's only one 32-year-old.
Okay.
They were all buried without clothes or personal items, so he's either trying to hide their identities or take trophies. And the cause of death for all is unknown, although it was widely held that they had been strangled.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Due to no other damage to their remains.
Yeah.
And the only items found there in the pit, other than bodies, was the one acrylic nail and a plant tag.
Really?
Yeah. Police believe it's from landscaping nearby in the properties, where they're building these houses.
Sure.
So it's like a tag telling you what kind of bush it is.
Right.
But who's the killer? Well, here are some of the suspects. Police looked at Fred Reynolds, who was a pimp in the area. He had a personal connection to some of the murdered women, including Doreen Marquez and Victoria Chavez. But they finally ruled him out. Then there was the rumor that Monica Candelaria's murder was reported by her mother in 2005, that she'd been murdered by Isaac or a connection to Isaac and buried in the West Mesa.
Yeah.
There was the story about Cinnamon Elks and Julie Naito. Both of them had told the same story to multiple people, including their mothers, that there was a dirty cop out there chopping off heads and burying bodies in the West Mesa.
Really?
Yes.
Whoa.
They both went missing just days or weeks after this. And when the police are asked about this, because I've seen more than one interview, and when the police chief, Schultz, is asked about this, his whole thing is, well, people can dress up and try to and say that they're a police officer. Anybody can say that they are a police officer, but they don't believe it was a police officer.
Right. Okay.
Another thing that was hinky, there was a call to Michelle Valdez's family after she went missing, but years before her body is identified, where this caller calls Michelle's sister and says that Michelle had been stabbed 22 times, was dead, and buried in the West Mesa. So these are just some of the hinky things that are going on.
Right.
But then police got some satellite images of the area where the bodies were found, images taken in the early 2000s. Investigators could see the area was virtually untouched. But by January of 2004, at least one of the West Mesa victims had gone missing, Monica Candelaria. There were tire tracks. By then, these satellite photos showed that there were tire tracks. It was a small personal driving path that could be seen to the location that the bodies were buried, which was just a few hundred feet away from any major road.
Okay.
And the next time satellite images are recorded is March of 2004. The tire tracks were even more pronounced. And this alluded to the fact that the killer had been back, and perhaps multiple times.
Right.
And this was all up until the developer started building houses in 2006. You could also see the tire tracks leading from a nearby road to this spot, which pointed investigators in the direction of a major suspect named Lorenzo Montoya.
Oh.
Yeah. Lorenzo lived out in West Mesa and worked for a local printing company. He lived alone in a trailer not too far from where the bodies are found. 2 years before police find the first bone, they would respond to a crime scene at Lorenzo's trailer.
Really?
Get this. In December of 2006, a woman named Sharika Hill met 39-year-old Lorenzo Montoya in a chat room online. Sharika was a sex worker in Albuquerque who made most of her appointments this way. She arranged to meet up with Lorenzo at his trailer in the early morning hours of December 17th, 2006. Before she left, she makes sure to call her pimp and her boyfriend, Frederick Williams, who actually drove her to Lorenzo's trailer. Frederick parked down the street and waited for her while she went into Montoya's trailer.
Right.
When there was no sign of Sharika after an hour, Frederick went to Lorenzo Montoya's front door to see what the heck fire was going on.
Right.
And this is where the stories start to differ just a little bit, but you got to take Frederick's word for it.
Okay.
He approaches the trailer and catches Lorenzo with Sharika Hill's body wrapped in a comforter and duct tape thrown over his shoulder as he's attempting to put her into his trunk.
Jeez.
Sharika is dead.
Wow.
And according to Frederick, in self-defense, he shoots and kills Lorenzo Montoya.
Whoa.
Police find that Sharika's been bound by the ankles, knees, and wrists with duct tape and cord. Police dig into Lorenzo's backstory, and the more they learned, the more they suspected he'd been at this for some time. He had numerous prostitution offenses, including soliciting an undercover cop,
Wow.
rape and strangulation. He's arrested again in 2003 for soliciting a prostitute. He had a domestic violence incident, aggravated battery. An ex-girlfriend said that he beat her more than once and did, quote, gross things, end quote.
Other than that, he was a really nice guy.
Apparently.
Wow.
But most damning was the fact that between 1991 and 2006, Lorenzo claimed his car had been stolen or damaged by fire or acid. He had to keep getting new vehicles. Is that because he's had bodies in them?
Yeah.
And after he's shot dead, they clean out his trailer and they put all of his stuff in storage in case they need it. But there were all of these sex tapes, and one actually made it onto the internet. There's no sex acts, but the camera is pointed toward the ceiling or the wall. You can't see anybody.
Right.
So it's only audio, but you can hear him after he's had sex with a sex worker. It sounds like he's pulling on a roll of duct tape. We all know what that sounds like.
Yep.
And preparing a trash bag for some unknown reason. Everybody knows what it sounds like when you open a trash bag.
Oh, yeah.
But there's zero physical evidence that links him to any of the West Mesa murders. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Yeah, there's something going on there.
Another suspect, a man named Ron Irwin from Joplin, Missouri. He only visited West Mesa, and the FBI raids his house, I believe, on a tip. They take a bunch of stuff, including photographs of what looks like dead women's faces in some of them.
Wow.
The photos were bizarre more than anything, because the one picture that they had that they were like, she's dead, she shows up like a week later and is like, no, I'm not dead.
He's not dead yet.
I'm not dead yet. But there was no evidence to link him to the murders.
Right.
And he took a polygraph and passed. He's also said that the FBI wrecked his life through their investigation, where they found absolutely nothing but his weird-ass photos.
Wow.
A landscaper named Joseph Blea came on the police's radar just days after the first bodies were found, because his ex-wife called the police and said that Joseph had dumped garbage in the exact spot where they found the body on a regular basis.
Really?
She also tells police that he frequented sex workers whom he had a profound hatred for. And remember, one of the items that was not a bone that was found was the ID tag for a specific plant.
Yeah.
He's a landscaper.
Ah.
And this tag is 8 feet deep underground. That's where they find it, along with the victim's body.
Okay.
Yeah. And he's a landscaper.
Wow.
Police find that he had purchased that exact same plant in the past, and Joseph has a history with law enforcement. Over 100 run-ins with police in his life that dated back to the 1970s.
Good Lord.
In the 80s, he's arrested for breaking into homes and stealing women's underwear.
Huh. There's a coincidence.
There's a coincidence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then he was arrested for flashing, exposing himself in public to numerous women. And he frequented the war zone for sex workers. But he hated them, calling them dirty whores and sluts.
Wow.
Then he exposes himself again. And when officers catch up with him, what do you think he had in his car?
Oh, I have no idea.
He had tape in his car.
Ah, a little duct tape. Mm-hmm. Wow.
Joe's ex-wives, because there's more than one, have said that he was cruel and violent, and his police records show this, including a 2008 arrest for attacking a family member.
Wow.
Both ex-wives said he would leave the house at night saying he was working, but that he was seeing a sex worker or worse. He also had a habit of keeping mementos from his sex workers, underwear or jewelry. His daughter actually finds underwear in the shed behind their house.
Oh, geez.
They start tailing Joe, and they watch him cruise the war zone. He's just watching. But when he's arrested for the 2008 attack on a family member, he is forced to submit DNA. And that came back as a positive match for the rape and assault of several teenage girls.
Wow.
And this gets Joe 90 years in prison.
Man.
Then Joe is going to tell his cellmate that he knew several of the West Mesa victims. Joseph Blea remains one of the suspects in the West Mesa murders, but he's going to die in prison already. He has denied it to everybody that he had anything to do with it.
Yeah.
But he's going to die in prison anyway.
Okay.
But there are other women who are unaccounted for. Darlene Trujillo, Anna Vigil, Felipa Gonzalez, also known as Vicky, Nina Heron, also known as Jasmine, Chantel Waits, Leah Peebles, and Vanessa Reed. Today, the 30-yard by 10-yard spot in West Mesa is marked by a memorial park where each of the victims' names are in the sidewalk.
Oh, wow.
I do want to say it took forever for this to take place. The city had kind of promised these families that they would make it a sacred spot.
Right.
But for the longest time, it only had a fence around it and there was trash in there. And part of the problem was it was in the middle of a housing development.
Right.
And the people who actually owned the property were like, well, if we turn it into a memorial for these women who were buried here,
we're going to lose money.
It's going to hurt our property values. That was actually one of the things that was said. Yeah.
Right.
But then the victims' names are on the sidewalk. So it's like a walking track. It's really beautiful.
That's nice.
But the murders are still unsolved. So if you know something, big or small, the Albuquerque Police Department wants you to call them. Please call the 118th Street Task Force at 1-877-765-8273 or 505-768-2450. We will put all of this in the show notes. You can even contact Crime Stoppers at 505-843-STOP. I've also seen where Ida Lopez is still fighting for her girls. She lists an email, ilopez@cabq.gov. If you have any information, if you know anything, and they're saying big or small, there is still a $100,000 reward.
Wow.
But retired Albuquerque Police Department investigator Ida Lopez and retired Albuquerque Police Department homicide sergeant Elizabeth Thompson want the women's families to know they have not been forgotten. And these two women continue to investigate the disappearances for the Albuquerque Police Department. And they do it on a contract basis because they're retired.
Amazing.
But they're still out there fighting for these girls.
Yeah.
But that is the story of the Mesa girls, and that's all I have to say about that. She is only one, but what if one is all that's needed? Hospice nurse Indy Luce has fallen in love. After caring for billionaire Louis Thornberry until his final breath, she's now engaged to marry the heir apparent of the global tech empire, David Thornberry. But as the divinely marked Indy packs up her old life to begin anew, a sacred promise comes back to haunt her with a vengeance. As an unrelenting spiritual battle unfolds in the shadows, the descendants of those like Indy find themselves persistently lured and ensnared as a relentless surge of evil becomes an unstoppable force. With malevolent entities following her every step, what Indy doesn't know about her family's sacred covenant could tip the scales of good and evil. The follow-up to the paranormal suspense novel Lead Me from Temptation and Book 2 of the Divine Darkness series, Deliver Me from Evil, is now available March 29th, 2024, wherever you buy or download books, or go to chriscalvert.com. If evil prowls seeking someone to devour, can one woman seek and save that which is lost?
So obviously the killings stopped.
Yes.
And I mean, who knows? Maybe it was somebody in prison that died or somebody that's in prison or
yes.
whatever. I mean, they may never know who this is.
The one guy who is murdered outside his trailer,
right?
After he dies,
everything stops.
Kind of stops,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting. And the other guy who was the rapist who got put in,
right?
It also stopped. So these girls were murdered before these guys were either killed or went away.
I'm putting my money on the trailer guy.
You're putting your money on the trailer guy?
Yep.
Not the other one?
No, I think it's the trailer guy.
Yeah. I know these families want to know.
Yeah.
They want to know. And I feel certain they've had, and I think I read in one of the sources that they've had psychics come in and try to do all kinds of stuff as well.
Right.
But it's just a mystery. It's absolutely a mystery. And these poor families, and there's still so many missing girls.
Well, hopefully we gave a little bit of respect to the girls that ended up murdered and missing. And
that's always my goal.
Yep.
So don't email me and tell me that all I did was talk about their lives, because I'm always going to talk about their lives.
That's the whole point of this podcast.
That's exactly right.
All right. Well, let's move on with a little bless your heart.
Well, bless your heart.
All right. Number one. Bag, borrow, or steal.
You know what?
What?
You don't get enough credit for these titles. You really don't, because I don't realize how great they are in the moment. I realize it when I'm putting the show notes together and I put together your sources with your story.
Yeah.
Hats off. Hats off, babe.
Thank you very little. All right. A failed purse snatcher was arrested after his victim spotted him hours later in a hospital emergency room.
Oh, my gosh.
Police in Tennessee say 27-year-old Koyama Locklear, 27, attacked Amanda Pyle from behind and tried to yank away her purse. But Pyle held on. The purse did not break, and Locklear fled. Pyle is 5'6". Locklear is 6'1", 200 pounds. Pyle later went to the hospital to have a sore knee checked out. All right. In the emergency room, she saw Locklear walking out with his arm in a sling.
Oh, my gosh.
And a dislocated shoulder.
Oh, he deserved so much more than that.
Pyle wrote down the license plate number to Locklear's gold Lexus, and police made an arrest. Locklear had previous arrests and burglaries, including one in which an unsuspecting victim found him hiding in a closet.
Oh, can you imagine?
Said Pyle, displaying the strength of her purse for News Channel 5 in Nashville. She quoted, "I'd recommend this purse to anyone." I thought that was the best line of the whole thing.
And their marketing department for that purse is like, write it down.
Oh, yeah.
Let's write it down. It's theft proof.
15 purses showed up on her doorstep the next day from the company. All right. Number 2, Home Alone.
Home Alone.
Yep. Police in Delaware say a man broke into a home, got so drunk that he couldn't make his way back outside. So he called 911 for a helping hand.
Aw.
I know. Police say John Finch, 44, was trapped in the home in part because he'd broken into it before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the homeowner then changed the locks so that a key was required, even outside.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Finch was locked in, so he drank 3 bottles of gin and 2 bottles of whiskey over 3 days.
Oh, my gosh. He was there for 3 days?
Yeah, he was making himself at home.
Oh, gosh.
When he tried to leave, he drunkenly climbed back out of the window and got stuck. So we think he called 911. I think we all know what happened then.
I was picturing, like, you know, there were jacks in the floor and pails of paint that were like flying down from the ceiling. I love Home Alone.
Yeah,
Sorry. It's one of my favorite movies.
All right, number 3 in finally.
Finally.
Son of a gun.
Son of a gun.
This is a short one, but boy, is it good.
Okay.
A 21-year-old Milwaukee man apparently thought it would be funny to wear a ski mask and to pretend to rob his mother when she got home. All right, here we go.
This has got to be a TikTok story, but keep going.
Apparently, the mom didn't get the joke, and she shot him in the groin with a .357 Magnum revolver.
I did not see that coming.
I know. The man's injuries were serious, but he survived.
She's not going to have grandchildren.
Nope. He told police that he was only pretending to rob his mother.
Oh, my gosh.
How'd that work out for you?
Oh, Bless his heart. Did he have a camera rolling the whole time? That seems like it was something that he would have done for TikTok or whatever.
God. Can you imagine?
Or do it for the gram.
Wow.
Where did she keep this loaded
I don't
weapon?
know. I don't know.
Oh.
357.
Wow.
Oh my God.
No children coming out of that. No grandchildren coming out of that.
That's going to leave a mark.
I did not see that coming.
That one won't buff out.
It's not going to buff out.
Nope. Thanks, John.
Well, if you have a bless your heart or you know somebody's heart who needs blessing, like all three of those people, gosh, bless their heart.
Oh, man.
All you got to do is go to Hitch to Homicide, where there's a pull-down menu, and while you're there, you can also suggest a case or tell us about your own true crime story.
Right.
Make sure it's something we can tell on the air.
Yeah, exactly.
That's my amazing husband out there.
And that's my beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitch to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.